Dave Chang here. Stay tuned to listen to a food critic spill the beans about being a food critic. And you may learn something that you did not know before about how, I'm just going to say it, food criticism is a fucking sham. Or it's not. At the very least, listen to one of the good ones, the great ones, Besha Rodell, talk about her life, her journey, and why she's in Australia and not in America anymore. Welcome to the Dave Chang Show, part of the Ringer Podcast Network, presented by Major Double Media. Thank you, Yolo Tango, as always. You can watch or listen to us on YouTube or Spotify. Join with Christine today, and we are going to interview Besha Rodell. She is currently the the food critic. Art and food, same thing. At The Age, which is one of the newspapers of choice in Melbourne, Australia. She formerly of LA Weekly, formerly of the New York Times. And she has a new book that's out today or out now. Hunger Like a Thirst, Food Stamps. From food stamps to fine dining, a restaurant critic finds her place at the table. She did not live a life that you probably might expect of a traditional food critic. And she's one of the few people that writes about food that sort of has lived it from the inside as well. Mm-hmm. So really excited to have her on board. And we'll get to that right now. But first, Chris and I are going to talk a little bit about what makes a good food critic, and we're not going to get anywhere about it. We're joined today with Besha Rodell. You may be familiar with her works. This is James Beard Award-winning food writer, editor, restaurant critic. She has a new book out, Hunger Like a Thirst, From Food Stamps to Fine Dining. Formerly of the New York Times.
New York Times, The Age, LA Weekly.
She is of The Age right now.
She is of The Age. Not formally. She is of The Age.
She is of The Age, not in...
The Age being a newspaper
yeah.
in Australia.
Born in Australia. We'll learn a lot about her life upbringing, what brings her back to the U.S. Mm-hmm. And I think she's a little bit of a different kind of food critic these days because we don't joke about this too much online. But you know what? Fuck it.
God.
So many of the food critics today, I would say minimum 50%, especially of the New York Times, going back, any major food critic, at least 50%, I'm going low on that. So people don't at me like, they come from privilege?
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that is may or may not have gone to an Ivy League school.
Yes. We're in position to attend an Ivy League university.
They did go.
They went to, they mostly graduated from Ivy Leagues.
And they grew up sometimes being very familiar with this. Mm-hmm. Like even the critics today, it's like, hey, like when you read, like I grew up going to these restaurants in New York City when I was like in the 90s, like, so you're basically saying like you went to Spence and
yeah, you're born.
So that's always been one of my major gripes is that number one, they will never say it, but they're writing for the voice of the people that are reading it. Who are reading these newspapers?
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. Is who are you writing this for? Who's actually reading the thing?
People that aspire to also go to these universities and in that universe, et cetera, et cetera. And I just don't know, number one, if it's actually a good representation. Two, do they actually know anything about food? Mm-hmm. Which actually does matter quite a bit. Like, I can't become the chief film critic of the New York Times, just because.
You like movies.
Yeah. I say that I can do a better rewatchables of Roadhouse than the rewatchables.
Yeah.
There's also just a limitation in how any critic, whether you're good or bad, is able to sort of have knowledge about what's going on in the world because it's just not what you can do. You can't just consume things in a moment's notice like you could. Like, oh man, I got to watch this Kurosawa film that I've never seen before, the director's cut. It's like, well, you just can't do that. So there's actually limitations. I think these are some of the bigger issues.
For sure.
Besides like alternate agendas, that might happen sometimes.
I don't know what you're talking about, Dave. I don't know the idea that a food critic might have an agenda. No idea. there's also the issue of just fundamentally, what is a food critic's job? What is their role? What are they supposed to be doing?
So for the next 15 minutes, we're going to try to build out the theoretical best food critic. Like you might see on ESPN or something else, like, hey, let's put together the best pitcher, the best college prospect, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to build right now the Franken critic.
Okay.
It's going to be so much better than every one of you real critics.
This is like a real video game avatar, the critic we're building. So let me start with this. Do you think the ideal food critic should have worked at restaurants?
Not necessarily. Not a deal breaker.
Mm-hmm.
Not a deal breaker. It would help. Like Bill Addison was a critic, is a critic, but worked in restaurants. I believe he was a pastry chef.
Yes.
I believe Tejo Rayo spent some time in the kitchen. I think that's about it. Honestly, Ruth Reichel spent a little bit time.
What do you think that, whether or not they've worked in a kitchen, what is that experience of being in and around a restaurant supposed to help them with?
How it works. But I think I would say the number one attribute first and foremost over that, I think that is a benefit, right? It would be like great if the pitcher was left-handed.
Right. It's like when you have a resume, it's like, and if you're proficient in Microsoft Word, that's great too.
Right. Oh, you speak Mandarin too? Great. not.
Right. So what is the number one attribute you're looking for as a talent scout here?
They give a shit. And what I mean by that is like Frank Bruni, one of my favorite critics, is not that he knew anything about food, and that's why I don't think it's a prerequisite. He cared about telling a story about. It almost made sense, like from his perspective. Like he never came in like I know everything. I'm constantly learning, but he knew that there was weight. He knew that. Let me back up. What I mean by give a shit is not that you know everything. It's that like you desire to know as much as humanly possible, right? Mm-hmm. It's a thirst for knowledge besides what's going to be filled up in your stomach. I think Pat Nurse, who's no longer a crit, is a good example. Can like look at a menu, eat a dish, and realize like, oh, the chef is a big fan of this band, and like the wording of this menu right now is like a weird allegory to this song, and then like he can triangulate and figure out like what's happening. You sort of need to have awareness outside of what's happening to just food. I think Gold is another good example. Like he cared about finding his own opinion before reading anyone else's.
I think give a shit about something specific. Each one of those people gives a shit about something different. Pat actually just gives a shit about restaurants. He just his goal, whether as a food critic or in his capacity now, is to make restaurants better. Whether it is through criticism, prodding people, what this could be, where this is in the historical context. Gold gave a deep shit about LA, but you've got to care about something.
Point of view.
Yeah,
I mean, when I think about the past New York Times critics all the way to Ruth Reichel, let's just sort of go over them. I mean, I started caring about food in 98, 99, and reading the reviews right before Ruth took over. I think Claiborne retired like 96, 97. So I started reading like 97, 98 New York Times reviews religiously. So Ruth was, if we're going to do Frank critic, I think maybe the better way is let's just go over the qualities that made the critics of the past 30, 40 years great. Ruth Reichel, sort of one of the most important voices in food, sells a ton of books, and is almost like the elder stateswoman of criticism. She was important because she realized that, there's great food other than in the traditional French fine dining places. She gave great reviews to Chinese restaurants. Her review of Soba, Hamora On, the soba shop in Soho, still like one of my favorite reviews. Great New York noodle town. She understood the importance of being anonymous. So she would get dolled up, dressed up, whatever. Like when I mean dolled up, she would get disguises on wigs, whatever. Yeah. And able to find a narrative that doesn't necessarily exist yet, right? You have to be a gatekeeper in the sense that you're connecting the dots of where things might be going. I think her review of Thomas Keller's French Laundry, I believe it was 97, 98, was probably the top 5 most important reviews in American history. It was like, hey guys, you may not know about it, but this is a big fucking deal. And I think this is the most important restaurant in America. It's like front page, changed gastronomy, like pretty significant. To be able to do those things, I think she was excited. And it was also different points. You can't, like critics, just like in any other part of culture, whether it's sports or music, right place, right time, right? Like Ruth was just starting out when important things were happening in food because you finally had the first generation of American chefs that were bringing it back from Europe. The Charlie Palmers, the Colicchios, the Kellers of the world, the Alfred Portales. So that was exciting. And I think she did an amazing job. William Grimes took over. Very somber. Very, very like serious. Very hard to please. Just like full stop. Eric Asimov as well wrote a lot about wine. And if I talk about the New York Times that like right now, because for me at least being an East Coast New York person, that was the center of the universe. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's like, his point of view, I was like, you better fucking impress me. He didn't know that much about food, but he was scholarly. I think he still writes for the Times. Asimov, I think he didn't want to be a critic necessarily. He did the 25 and under. He wanted it to be uplifting. He didn't want to talk shit. Yeah. And then you had Amanda Hesser, who did it part-time. And then it moved on to Frank Bruni. That was a big coveted position in the early aughts. I think Frank is an amazing writer. He's probably the best writer of the bunch. Like, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean,
yeah, just stylistically, craft wise, probably, and then intellectual curiosity.
Yeah, but he never went in being like, I know everything. It was like, hey, impress me. This is just another part of culture. Like if I watch a movie and it's funny to me or it's interesting, like I can opine on that. And I think it was this everyday, every person approach in one of the most important parts of New York City history. Not because I was involved with that at that time. It just was so much happening, you know. From 2004 to 2010, it was just like the most amazing kinds of restaurants were opening up. And then Sam Sifton took over, and Steady Sam was like, I think he never really wanted the job. You know, he was the editor before. We love Sam. And I think like his point of view was, I'm just here to like, till I don't have to be here.
Right, but that
not in a negative way.
No. In terms of how that played out, right? His last article was just from the backyard at Frankie's, right? And just like it was about where does joy come from.
He's just a happy dude. He just wanted to hang. He wasn't looking to make change people's perspectives. He just wanted people to enjoy it. Yeah, and he's always been that way. I think he I can't remember what was the newspaper he wrote for. Right, he's another. We're all talking about like Harvard grads right now. I think you know. And Sam was one of the best. Yeah. Right. He like brought a sense of, I said, joy and fun.
That's what he was looking for in an experience at a restaurant. He was actually a good antidote at that moment.
So Sifton was the food editor of the New York Times. Then he became the critic. Pete Wells was the food editor of the New York Times. Then he became the critic. And they switched jobs. Sam goes to build the New York Times food app, small thing that he helped create. And then Wells, who was a fantastic writer, also an Ivy League grad from Penn.
Right.
Started to write, and he was... I love Pete's writing when he was writing Pete is Hungry or whatever. He wrote for the Food and Wine and a few other publications. I think he was at Esquire as well. But the Times, it was like, I have to make a mark.
Yeah. It was very much... while maintaining some degree of anonymity, it was very much about putting a personal stamp on the thing. So, like, obviously, the signature reviews are Guy's American Kitchen in Times Square, and
I think he was put in a tough position simply because there was just so much happening in the food world that like hard for him to keep up with everything. But he was trying his best, and I think it was him trying to like corral this movement into a narrative that made sense, which is why he wanted to almost become the sheriff, right, of American dining.
Right.
All of a sudden, New York Times becomes a national publication. It's California, blah, blah, blah. They expanded California. Tejo is the California critic now. And when it was this, that's where food was. It's just massive cultural thing that's happening. We don't need to go into my long, good and bad relationship with Wells, but like, I think there was a stretch. My only criticism, truly, there's like a 4-year stretch where it's clearly that he hated food.
That's a pretty...
No, it's true. It's like he hated his fucking job. He hated food. And I think that like, it's hard to say that. It's clear that like, you can let your life spill into your work.
For sure.
Right?
You can't hide that.
You can't hide that.
Yeah.
And, at some point, like, you can't just love it forever. I don't blame him. And then, we're here where we are right now, where it's a, interim critic, where, we have Priya with Julia Moskin. It's going to be somebody else. Mm-hmm. But all along the way, it's like there's only been one really great writer. Mm-hmm. I mean, they can all write extremely well. There's only one that, like, someone came up with a book I want to read, and that would be Bruni. Mm-hmm. Bruni opining on politics or just culture in general, it's like, oh, there's a flow and a sense of style. You don't have to be a hard-nosed a-hole, which is how I think a lot of chefs probably viewed Grimes. Just like Mr. Burns is how I think a lot of people looked at him. So it's not like you have to be mean and serious. And on the other hand, you can be super affable and everyone loves you, like Sifton. Mm-hmm. And then on the other end, you have Ruth, who was like sort of broke the mold. But if I look at what makes a great food critic, at least from the New York Times perspective, it was you don't need to know anything about food.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
You actually just need to have an open mind.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that. I think that there is, like we always say, Wesley Morris would make an amazing food critic.
And I think Wesley Morris would win a third Pulitzer Prize as the New York Times food critic.
I think that's right. I think that
if the board of the New York Times knew fucking anything, they would just force him to take that job.
I think Jonathan Gold knew so much about L.A., but the only thing I would say is like you don't need to know everything about food, but you have to understand the greater like social context, the historical context, like what is how culture works at large. I do think you have to know that.
You're right. I would say that's equally as important to be able to connect the dots, right?
Do you have to? Okay, so you said something that's really interesting. The New York Times is actually the toughest thing to think about in terms of like what makes a good critic because it's not a local paper. You're reviewing restaurants in New York, but the influence and the purview is actually all of America.
Not anymore.
At certain points in time.
And I'll say not anymore simply because critics in general didn't move fast enough.
I think that's 100% true, but I also think trying to move fast to keep up with the internet to be like, I can be a national critic. I think the idea of a national critic doesn't work for me. I actually think the best critics are the ones who truly know their demographic and their geography and their city. And I think if I'm building just like actual rules for a resume for a food critic, I would personally, if I was hiring for San Francisco, LA, Minneapolis, Chicago, wherever, I would want that person. This is my personal pet peeve. I hate how many times in San Francisco history, recent history, the critic job goes to somebody who just moved there for the job.
Yep.
Makes me insane.
Well, this is why most cities don't have a food critic anymore. They used to. Almost every city had like a full-time food critic.
Yep.
For the local weekly. But the reality is like all of these critics I'm talking about, New York Times, still wildly important. Super fucking. All the critics are. New York Mag, you name it. They're all fucking super important. They don't carry the weight they used to. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good thing. But at the same time, like we need a unified heavyweight champion. Mm-hmm. It's too fractured, and we need somebody to be like, this is just the way it is, because it's great that you guys are all opining. It's great that you can go on TikTok and do your fucking dance in front of the restaurant. But like, You know, like you telling me it's good, it's hard to verify.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think what makes a good critic, thirdly. So the first attribute is.
I mean, we talked about giving a shit is the first most important thing about something. Point of view.
Point of view. First one is point of view. Two is you actually have to be a sick writer.
You got to be good. Let's just remove the food from the first part of the phrase. Or writer.
Yeah,
like just be a good writer.
Writer.
You know.
Third is you have to be able to connect the cultural zeitgeist at a moment's notice. Knowing what you have to have cultural references that you can pull. Right.
Yeah.
If you think about Goal could do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Wells is actually really good at that too.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
mm-hmm.
They're all, you know, I'd say the fourth one is, so one is point of view. Two is you got to be a great writer. Three is cultural zeitgeist. Four is, I think you have to be honest. I think without an agenda, and you have to be honest. And I think you have to be okay to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not taking on, so nothing bothers me more when I say being honest. And then we'll get on to this. And I think we should get back to this conversation after we finish our interview with Besha. When food critics take on the big bad wolf in any given town. I'm like, why? Like when Wells took on Guy Fieri, I was like, that was a dumb fucking review. Mm-hmm. Why? Mm-hmm. Oh, because you can. Mm-hmm. Right? Anytime a critic goes after the top dog in the field, like, and you know it's going to be a scorching, fucking scathing review. What is the purpose of that?
Self-aggrandizement.
What was that?
Self-aggrandizement.
And for self-promotion.
Yeah. The thing. Okay, let me put it in this term. Nobody who was reading the review of Guy's restaurant in the New York Times was planning to go to Guy's restaurant. Like, let's just think about that.
You're
for
a
second.
defender. All of a sudden, you're a defender of the people that are reading this and their money as well. What?
None of them were reading you. You're doing this for you. That's what that's for. That's what a review like that is for. It's for you.
But you grill them on that.
And it goes, you know, I think so often. I mean, Ratatouille we think about all the time, and eventually we will do our movie club on that. But I just remember just like the lines about how easy it is to write negative criticism.
Yeah.
It's easy to write. It's easy to read. Like, it's easy.
I would say probably if that's the fourth one, right? Being honest. Is that the fourth one? I can't remember.
Yeah, fourth one.
The fifth one is sort of like maybe 4B to this, but I think significant enough that it has to be its own. I think that you have to match your values. You have to walk the walk, right? I hate it. And this isn't just food criticism. I hate it in general when journalists think that they have the moral authority to opine on things when they themselves don't live the way that they do. All right? Like,
yeah.
Are you yourself a good person? Are you yourself humble? You may think you have a lot of self-awareness and empathy, but before you cast stones, that's all. It's like, I think you can get in a bubble, this echo chamber where you think that because you are sort of unassailable, that it starts to influence how you think about yourself and what you do. And I've seen this with every fucking food critic that it's like, because I've known most of them, like, whoa, you know, it's hard. It's in a little bit, it's not their fault. I know this. It's lead singer syndrome. Yeah. Everybody that's experienced some kind of power, it happens.
Right. Your shit don't stink.
But like, how do you correct that? And I think that a lot of times critics tend to fool themselves and thinking, that's not me. You know? But it happens. And I think that, like, you know, the reason why the food criticism they can hold on to that sort of power and wield it a little bit more than any other form of criticism is because it's not widely understood by everyone else.
Yeah.
They can hold on to this power because for the same reason that they can't eat all around the world at the same time. You know, it's like, why, if you're a film critic and you are too big for your britches, you're going to get fucking beat down.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
You know, it's like,
because it's actually more of a level, the great separator is like, I have an expense account and I can eat wherever I want. Everyone can see every movie. You know what I mean? So like you can't
because it is so
lord
small.
anything.
Like you're.
Yeah. I mean, sort of corollary to that, and I mean we should get into Besha, but we haven't talked about taste and somebody's taste. In my opinion of this, I wonder what you think is. I don't think that being a food critic is about having quote unquote good taste, but it is about being open and honest about what your taste is.
Chris, let's set this aside because there are people that refuse to eat certain things too.
This is what but when it goes to honesty, this is what
you
I'm
gotta
talking
put
about.
that in as a disclaimer, man.
You have to own that in a very real way. And like I'm looking forward to talking to Besha, and I want to ask Besha, like, what don't you like? You know? Gold famously didn't like eggs. Right?
He's not the only food critic that doesn't like eggs.
But very few of them
You know who you are.
Very few of them admit this fact. And then let's say I walk into Restaurant X and their signature dishes.
It's all, you know what? One more thing before getting to Besha. It's also funny that like food critics can critique a restaurant that they know nothing about in terms of the food. Yet somehow they know enough to write a review. How did that happen?
Yeah. But just all I would ask is like, you don't have to pretend to know. I would rather you say I don't know. Just I would as a reader, not as somebody who's on the site.
That.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can do it. Come on, guys. You can do it.
All right, I promise you, after our interview with Besha, we're gonna go back to this topic, and we're gonna like.
We'll see what we'll combine. We'll consolidate our learnings here.
We're joined with Besha Rodell. We're talking to her, and she just arrived yesterday from Australia, and that is a flight that I have done 70 times round trip.
Yes, at
Literally.
least, me at least that many.
That's over almost 2.5 months in the air from New York. That's
God.
like 21 hours round trip. How do you do it?
I mean, I'm used to it now when it's just the LA, like that 14 hours, like that feels great to me because you're like, nobody can call me. Like, I'm just watching movies and then I'm taking a pill and falling asleep. And like, you know, so I actually like that trip, but don't go through Fiji. Sorry, Fiji Air. I know it's one of their like selling points that they do it cheaper, but I do not recommend.
Well, you're here and you're on a tour for your book, Hunger Like a Thirst.
Yes.
And you've like kind of walked in the lion's den a little bit here.
Yes, I have. I know. It's pretty exciting.
a little bit. Right?
This is the first time.
I don't think we've ever
had a critic. We've wanted to.
Have you not?
I don't think
No.
Yeah.
I mean, usually my relationship with the critics the past 10 years have not been great by the end of
It's
it all.
such an interesting relationship, though, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
and I do feel like certain chefs have very certain relationships with certain critics. Like, I certainly have some chefs that I've reviewed multiple times, and I feel like, you know, there's this weird relationship there that is like almost. There's an intimacy to it, and I don't want, you know, I'm not pushing it in that direction, but it's like nobody cares as much about your work except like your mom and your backers.
Mm-hmm.
Like if it's a good critic, like you get this thing where you're like really interested in somebody's work and you're thinking more deeply about it, I think, than almost anybody else in their life.
What do you think the ideal form of that relationship between critic and chef is? I mean, you think about art critics. Jerry Saltz, we talk about all the time. He is a stated, avowed fan of certain artists.
Sure.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? I don't think they hang out. But he's
Right.
like, I'm a fan.
Yep.
He would like to hang out.
He would like to
Yeah,
hang out.
totally.
If only they would hang out with him.
I couldn't be a music critic for that reason. I would be too much of a fangirl. I would be like, you know, I want to please this person.
So what should it be in food?
I think that it should be where you are considering primarily what that person is trying to achieve, and then how well are they doing that, and then putting that in a greater context of like, what do we want our cities to look like, and what do we want to champion in those cities. So those are the things that really I take most seriously. I mean, if a chef just wants to like sell, you know, $40 egg sandwich because then plonk some caviar on it or a gold leaf or whatever, you know, like, and that's what they're trying to do, then I don't really care what they're trying to achieve, you know, but like, I think it's really bad. And look, I came into it probably because I had too many opinions. I was like, I have so many opinions. I worked in hospitality, and you know, if you're a chef, you go into or a manager. I was a manager when I left hospitality. Like, you go into any restaurant and you can't turn it off. Like, you like have so many opinions, right? So that's how I started it. But I think that was a naive and kind of childish way to look at it. And my actual fandom or opinions don't really matter that much. You know, like it's more about like, yeah, what's this person aiming for? And I really think it's almost like at its best, it's like it's a consultant you don't have to pay, and you can take or leave. You can say, no, they're wrong, I double down, this is what I meant, you know? Or you can say, yeah, okay, that's interesting, like, let me think about that. But you know, it's a job that probably requires a fair amount of ego to go into it. And so tamping down that ego and being like, it's not about me, or it's not about my legacy as a critic, or, you know, I mean, and there's some people, you think about Jay Rayner, who's just like, he loves things or he hates them. And it's just like, I'm writing just...
Jay also loves himself, and he'd be the first one to tell you that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, totally. But like, that's his shtick, and it works for him, and he's really fun to read, and like, that's what he does. And then there was Jonathan Gold, who was like, it was much more about the literature of the thing. You couldn't really tell whether he liked the restaurant or not a lot of the time, but it was like about reading about the joy of eating more than it was like, I'm coming down one way or another. Different critics have different things, but for me, that's what I am for, is to be encouraging people to be their best selves, basically. Make the best restaurant that they can.
So how do you feel when other critics are not playing that role? Because what you just said is so singular.
Yeah.
Not that I've talked to critics all the time, but never in this regard. That has never come to my imagination as to the critic's role.
Yeah.
When I talk about whether it's Gold or Pete Wells or any of them writing right now.
Right.
It's a different agenda. And I feel like almost across the board, everyone's like, oh, I'm a defender for the reader of this publication.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's a crock of shit.
Yeah. I mean, look, I do think that it helps that I came straight into this from the industry. I'm married to a chef who is not in the industry anymore. He does nonprofit so as to not create a conflict of interest for me, which is nice of him. But, you know, absolutely I'm telling people whether they should go spend their money there. But even that, it's like not everyone has the same taste as me. Like, there are people who want to go to some club restaurant and like do drugs in the bathroom. If that's like your jam, you should be able to read my review and be like, oh, this restaurant's for me. Like, she's not giving it a particularly good rating because, look, that's not what I want to promote in my city in particular. You know, if I worked in Las Vegas, maybe I'd feel a little differently. But like, you should be able to read between the lines and be like, I know if I should go to this place. Like, you know, that's... Other critics, like, I think it's really hard, especially the New York Times job. That is a job with just so much pressure and so much legacy and so much kind of, you know, I wrote for the New York Times for a long time, and there is a fair amount of, well, there was for me, I think, you know, like, they wanted me to be a Times writer, and there was a lot of kind of like, let's, you know, and I was like, have you ever read me? Like, all I have is voice. Like, I don't have, you know what I mean?
What do you mean by Times writers?
I mean, it's, you know, the tone of the New York Times, just like, you know, you kind of know the tone of the New Yorker or whatever. It's like they have a tone. It's hundreds of years in the making. It's kind of clipped. It is pretty straightforward. I was actually just looking yesterday at two versions of a review that I wrote for them about a restaurant in Tasmania. And the first one, I tried to write it kind of in the style of an H.P. Lovecraft story, because it was like about Tasmania. And I don't know if you've been to Tasmania, but that place is really haunted and weird and beautiful.
And everything can kill you.
Yes, exactly. And so like, and this restaurant was like in an old mental institution. So it was like a horror story, you know, and they were like, oh, absolutely not. Like, no way. This is just too weird. And, you know, so looking at the two versions side by side, both of them are really good, but one of them is very me and one of them is very New York Timesian. I think they give their main restaurant critic a little bit more leeway. Like, Pete certainly developed a very distinctive voice that was him, but he also, as most New York Times critics are, has been at the Times for a million years. Like, you get kind of, you get absorbed into that, and then you know, you don't succeed at that newspaper without playing their specific game. So.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting. I think what Dave is also latching onto is that idea of at its best, the critic should be like a free consultant for a chef.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Because at its best, the critic understands the world and what you were trying to achieve better than anybody else, better than the general audience.
Absolutely.
And can see your work where maybe you can't see it.
Absolutely.
Where if you have a purpose, and I know, and you have a stated purpose, and we're both agreed that you're trying to do this for your industry, for your art, for your city, and I go and eat at your restaurant, and I say, hey, this is outside of your stated purpose here.
Yep.
Like that is the role of criticism in this idealized world.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people will say, yeah, but people want to know how much it costs, where to eat. It's a review.
You can
It's
do
not
all
a
of those
criticism.
things. There's no reason you can't do all of those things.
I've always thought when it comes to stars, and you know, I've never had to like award stars in the way that you know, New York Times food critics have. You know, I've been in positions where I've given awards and
Right.
reviewed restaurants. But to me, a star is silly when you try to say it's 1 star is good, 2 stars is, you know, exceptional,
Yeah.
3 stars is whatever, 4 stars is one of a kind. To me, star ratings is as a critic is really like, how badly do I want you to go to this restaurant?
Well, in LA especially, I instituted a star rating system at the LA Weekly because Jonathan had just gone to the LA Times and he took it away at the LA Times. And I felt like LA was a city that just kind of needed a star rating system. And I think if you look at LA now, it's like Michelin has kind of taken some power because they're the only people who are doing stars here now. But for me, it was how far should you drive? How far that's how many stars. And if you should get on a plane from Melbourne to come have this taco, like that taco can get 4 stars. Do you know what I mean? Like that was...
Well, that's like that's the Michelin way.
Yeah,
right? It's
totally.
like
I
worth
mean,
a
well,
special
Michelin's
trip.
never going to give 3 stars to a taco. They
Of
just
course,
are
of
not, you
course.
know. And I'm working with a rating system now in Melbourne that's a score out of 20, and then there's hats, and then there's, you know, it's like, and it is so based on fanciness because we give 5 points for service and 3 points for setting, and like you just can't get a street vendor to 5 points for service because that's not appropriate for them. And so I find that system really frustrating. And we're trying to be like, okay, we can make it a critic's pick and not give it a score. But then it's like, how many things do you know? And then I get to the point where I'm like, just read the review. Can you just read the review? But, you know, people love the stars. They love them. Readers love them. Chefs even want them.
Well, I do know that, at least with the New York Times, stars sell.
Yeah, 100%.
Newspapers. And, well, you
And
know,
fill
newspapers
seats.
are a business to sell things.
They're a business that's struggling, and restaurant criticism is very expensive. So you got to take that stuff into consideration. It'd be lovely to just do it all in this kind of like non-business way, but you gotta have people read you to make it matter. You know.
So before you before you jumped in here, Dave and I were sort of talking. We talk about critics on this show a lot.
I bet.
But we were sort of, Dave was kind of speculating about what the ideal critic would be. If we could sort of Frankenstein from all the critics that he has come across, or we took qualities that we see missing, or even down to like how long you should live in a city before you start being the critic there, all of these things. Let me ask you, and something maybe our listeners are interested in, how did you become a critic? How does anybody get to be a critic? And should there be sort of these parameters that we're talking about?
I mean, I don't think that there's any one-size-fits-all thing because it's an art, not a science. And so I think if the critic has it in mind, I think for the New York Times, again, it's too important of a job for anybody to have it for 40 years. Like, I don't think
Term limits.
Yeah. I mean, for that specific job, and maybe a couple in the world, but that one in particular, I feel like, and there pretty much is self-imposed term limits at the Times. Nobody sticks around there the way they do it. Some paper in
Stay
St.
until
Louis.
you hate the job.
Yeah,
And then leave.
and
And
then
then leave.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't
right.
keep staying.
Yes, don't keep staying. But I think so for me, the short answer is like I was in college and I got knocked up and had to move back to North Carolina, and found myself very, very kind of bewildered and poor on the side of a secondary highway between Chapel Hill and Durham, and was like, I got to get out of here. Like, I got to do something, with this baby and my teenage sister who my mother left with me when she moved away. And I had come from the industry. I had gone to school for writing. And so it was the thing that I knew about. My boyfriend was a chef. We had spent when we lived in New York, we had spent all of our money eating out. We were those obsessive people. And, you guys know 20 years ago, that wasn't really as much of a thing. It was much more.
It was also the best time.
It was. It was. I mean, man, and so I was in that. Yeah, I lived in New York. I mean, I went to high school in New York, but then when I went back, it was 1999 through 2003, which were such great years in New York, and so I was in that world. My husband was working at Montrachet. Like, I was working at the grocery in Brooklyn, and we were very deep in that kind of culture and world. And I think a lot of journalists kind of go to school and they're like, oh, I'm a good writer, I'm a good reporter, I want to work at a newspaper. But it really helps to have an area of real specificity. And I wrote this review of Bistro St. Mark's, which was in Brooklyn, one of the first kind of like more ambitious restaurants to open in Brooklyn. And it had been pretty good when it opened. And we went back about 6 months later, and it was a really bad experience. And I just wrote this kind of like humorous takedown review and posted it on eGullet, at where I was kind of lurking at the time, which was one of the first real, get in there and punch like food forums, and a guy, an editor in North Carolina, saw it and really liked it and ended up giving me a column there. And then I kind of weirdly befriended Bill Addison. He was coming through town, had nobody to eat with at the Magnolia Grill, and called me up and asked me to come. We didn't know each other. And then a couple months later, he left his critic job in Atlanta. And because I knew him, I had a bit of an in there. And then we've just been like following each other in and out of jobs for the last 20 years since then. But it was a pretty random series of events. I had to leave New York, I think. There's too many voices there. There's too many people clamoring for it. The media world there is real bitchy, and or at least it was when I was there. It was not easy to, break in if you weren't like already one of the cool kids or whatever. And, there's a lot of nepotism and a lot of whatever.
You don't say.
Yeah.
Well, let's dig into this, because you said a bunch of things that are you say a lot of these food critics go to school and they want to do this thing.
This is our internal. We joke. We've never really said this out loud, but we always joke. Among a few chefs, but particularly the two of us.
A lot of the schools that you're talking about happen to be very fancy.
A lot of the media, a lot of the positions of power, and they'll never. That's what I'm like. They should be the fucking ones to talk about it too. It's like you're somewhat at a disadvantage if you don't come from somewhat of wealth.
Yes.
And an Ivy League university.
100%.
Because that's the New York Times way too.
Absolutely. And look, I have a mea culpa here. My mother went to Harvard and she worked at the New York Times. She did not last there, and I did not have any ins there, like through that. I did when I went to work for the Australia Bureau. Absolutely. The way I got in there was that I know an old friend, colleague of hers, but they were like, oh, you won a James Beard Award. Like, they would not have taken me seriously at all if not for that. But you're absolutely right. These are structures of power. There just isn't, there's almost no world. And I think if you come from kitchens, which is so democratic in a way that is really incredible to me. And it's one of the things that is really difficult, I think, about the kind of like tidying up of restaurants that has had to happen in the last 10 years. The downside of that, if there is one, is that it's then less welcoming to people who are just total scumbags who are trying to get their life together. My husband, I write about this in the book, he came to kitchens from being like a junkie rock star. Like, that was where he was kind of like
that kind of cook doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And it used to quite a bit.
Yes, absolutely. And it's because those guys are pretty hard to control in the kitchen. You can't but they're also pretty good cooks usually. And, he struggles with that too. Like, he fit in that world because it was an okay place for him to scream obscenities, not at anybody in particular, just because that's what he likes to do. So
this is a little the effect you're talking about is a little bit of what happens in food media as well, where I started working in food because I cooked in kitchens. I met him. We just shot the shit about music and art and things, and then he dragged me into this world. And then I started to meet kids who were like, I'm in the NYU food writing program.
Oh, wow.
I'm in, this program specifically designed to become food criticism. My aim is to do this thing in the same way that, people are showing up at kitchens now who wanted to be cooks.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You were born in Narnia.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I was born in a bungalow on on a farm that's 6 hours into the forest from Melbourne, like on these like dirt roads. My parents were extreme hippies. My mother thinks I was the first like planned home birth in Victoria, like, you know, not including the pioneer days when everyone did it that way, obviously, but like, and so I just took a really circular route to do this. And I don't think there was any food writing programs either. And, you know, I did an event in Long Beach last night and somebody stood up and said, how, you know, do you have advice for somebody who's an aspiring chef or aspiring food writer? And I was like, yeah, don't do it. Like both of them, like, you know, chef life is extremely hard. People who actually make like a proper life out of it and aren't just ruined at the end of it are extremely rare. And there aren't any food writing jobs. Like at the same time, I don't want to discourage people because I want new voices in that space. I really want to see something more than just what we currently have and have had forever, which is a lot of, you know, middle-aged white guys who like were on the real estate beat and then got bored of that. You know what I mean? Like, or were the Rome correspondent and so knew enough about Italy to like, you know, be like, oh, I have a food pedigree.
Talk
I like
Bruni, but
I mean,
yeah. I mean, but like that's how it happened. That's how it happened. That's how all of it happens. It's like you have some kind of in, or you're like a guy who has lived in New York for long enough that you're like, I have opinions about how this city should be better, you know, and that's how people get in. And I would like to see that change, but there's so few restaurant critic jobs, and the alt weeklies are gone, and that's the way in for most of us.
The alt weeklies were the Oakland A's of food journalism.
Absolutely.
Around the country.
Of journalism,
you could be
period.
fucking weird and do the craziest shit
Absolutely.
and develop your voice.
God,
and then next thing you know, you get drafted by the Yankees, and you know, even Sam Sifted was a fucking weirdo.
Oh, totally.
And in
He
the
was
best
too.
way,
Yeah.
best way.
Yeah.
And then, you know, no more facial hair for
they're
you.
they're literally Oakland A's, and Oakland had a great East Bay Express was a great
Yes.
alt weekly. Like that's
It's so
totally
sad. I
true.
mean, it is one of the things. It's one of the there's a lot of kind of secondary things in this book that are not just restaurant criticism, and one of them is the death of that kind of media and how, you know, I just went through the ringer with that. You know, I worked at Creative Loafing in Atlanta. I worked at LA Weekly here as both of them went down. And it's so sad because those were really weird papers and allowed me to be weird and allowed me to find my voice and allowed me to fuck up in a way that like I couldn't have at a daily and like kept me from myself, you know, like saved me. There were such good editors there. I got paid nothing, you know, but like it was a training ground. And in the same way that I would say to a chef, like, don't go to culinary school, just get a job and get paid crap, but get paid to learn. I would also have said, you know, yeah, go for a couple years, work for 30 grand or whatever in a cheap town where you can live cheaply and you're getting your meals subsidized, hopefully, and like learn how to do it. Now I feel like people are doing Substacks, they're doing podcasts, but like there is no help there. There's no integrity structure. Like the biggest thing that working at those newspapers taught me is like proper journalism ethics, like, you know, which I don't think the public knows that much about and don't need to really unless they are interested in it. But it is missing hugely from the kind of influencer culture that exists. It doesn't exist in that culture. And it's one of the things that like I am so passionate about, I'm so strict about in my life. And I got it from these like really smart journalists who I just don't think that kind of training exists anymore, you know?
I think that's a good description of what you were when it comes to the influencers, the TikTokers, the people who are, you know, by and large have more power as to like where people are eating right now. The thing that you were saying of like what is missing is transparency and journalistic integrity, whether or not it exists at the daily level, either some debate, but also like I'm doing my TikTok outside this restaurant. I definitely got paid to be here.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I think people don't know that at the daily paper, most of them, I would say, most of them, if it was found out that you were, you know, getting some kind of kickback or you were getting something for it, you would be fired. I mean, you just, the things that I had to sign to just freelance for the New York Times, I was not allowed to have taken like a press junket.
New York Times is an exception.
It is an exception, but I think that for food writing in particular, it's an exception. But like, that kind of idea that and look, again, it's very expensive. And so you get this catch-22 where it's like either you've got to get the free meals or you have to be wealthy enough to self-fund. And then you get a level of privilege that doesn't really understand what money is worth. You know what I mean? Like, one of the things that I think distinguished me when I started was I was pissed off when things were, a ripoff. And most critics don't have to think about that very much. A lot of critics don't even look at the bill. They're not paying it. So
but they write like they do care about it.
Yeah, well, that's good. They should.
But in a false way, I feel like. You
don't feel like it's an advocacy.
My job was to know everything about all the fucking critics.
Yes.
And I would read shit. I was like, that is just straight fucking not true from you. You know what I mean? Like, most people wouldn't know. It's useful for the audience to read that.
Yeah.
But I know that is not necessarily how they might think about something.
Yeah.
And maybe I know too much.
Yeah.
But I find it to be my personal belief that you should try to mirror your personal values and who you are as much as your writing should be.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And I don't think that's always the case.
No, it's not always the case. Again, you've got to have a fairly huge amount of ego to go into a profession in which you believe that your opinion should speak for the entire city or the entire country or whatever it is. I think that the kind of the magic there is when you figure out how to do that in a way that you filter it through all these other things. You filter it through, what is this chef trying to do? You filter it through, what does this city need? So
I just think with the price thing in particular, that's the hardest part and the falsest part. I think what Dave is butting up against here is I can theoretically sit at a restaurant and say, this is $270 for this bill. That's a lot of money. Is that too much money? But if it's not my money, I can't ever truly
you can't
empathize
feel it.
with that.
Yeah,
I mean, really feel it.
Yeah, I think that I could, and in some ways, it's harder and harder for me to now because for the first time, literally in my life, I've been back in Australia for 7 years, almost 8 years, and for the first 3 years, I was broke. You know, and so having that fear of poverty that is deep within you does help you to look at a figure and be like, ouch, that, even if I'm not paying that. And then the other thing is, for most of my career, I was heavily subsidizing my,
with eating your own research for.
Well, no, not just that. I mean, my budget at LA Weekly was $300 a week. And we had to eat 3 times at a place. We had that New York Times standard of you go 3 times. And if I didn't mention the cocktails or the dessert, my editor would be like, why? You know how much it costs to eat 3 times at most of the restaurants in LA? And obviously you can balance it out by being like, okay, I'm going to do this, pho place or whatever to balance. But that's not really how it works. That becomes, you follow what is interesting to your readers and what's interesting for the city. And so I was spending, at least $30,000 of my own money, those years. I mean, I could claim it on my taxes, but it was, and that's not the case.
It comes across in your writing, though.
Yeah,
that's
good.
I mean?
Yeah.
It reads your, and it's not just you, the critics that I know that had to pay out of pocket, it means so much more that this review is out there because of the blood, sweat, and tears that went into literally eating the food.
Yeah, and that's hard then. I don't feel it's a very hard conundrum because it would be different for different people. For people who have kind of, wealth that is not just the paltry paycheck they're making, that gives them an advantage, It was hard for me. I was a young parent. I sacrificed probably stupid things to do that, and it worked out in the end. But I also think it's very difficult. And I understand where your frustration comes from because the public does not understand how much it costs to run a restaurant. They don't understand how much ingredients cost. Right now, it's just wild, I was talking to Paul Carmichael a couple weeks ago and he was like, New York is just you need somebody to come in and look at a wire and it's oh, that's $600, he was just like, it is crazy trying to operate in Manhattan. And so then the public doesn't know that, and it's boring. They don't care, but at the same time, in a city like this or a city like New York, it's like, or you could just go down the street and get a burrito and like be full, and that costs $10. So there's like this very weird balance for somebody writing about it where you have to be understanding of what real estate costs, of what labor costs. In Australia, our biggest thing is labor because it's waiters get paid $30 an hour there.
So expensive. And also, on holidays, it's times 3. Yeah. These are all good things, but man, it's like
my kid is 21. He is a bartender at like a distillery that nobody comes to. Like he just sits and like reads all, and he gets paid $35 an hour. He doesn't even really know how to bartend. I mean, he's learned now, but like
really know how
he doesn't have to. Nobody comes.
Amazing. I have so many questions. I thought I was going to be organized. I have this sheet of paper, all these things, but man, what you were referencing in terms of like, having some sense of honesty to some degree, it's like, what happens when a critic doesn't reveal like all the aspects that goes in a restaurant? Because like I'm not picking on Pete here, right? We spoke. One day we'll sit down and we'll drink like it used to be. But I think about a couple of reviews. One is, I think one of the worst things that's ever been written, and it pisses me off just thinking about it, was his destruction of LocoL.
Right.
Which was Daniel Patterson and Roy Choi's place in Watts. Jonathan later gave it, the restaurant of the year. Big, gotta be there. And it was a restaurant for the town that wasn't going to be processed food, and it was really a noble idea. I think the execution was difficult. And in that review, I think the biggest complaint I had was like, do you know how hard it is to train people that have never cooked before?
Sure.
And to do something completely de novo that's never been done before.
Right.
Why are you writing this review? Why are you not sort of celebrating what it can be?
Right.
And that's when I was like, this has gone fucking sideways.
Yeah.
And I hate this so fucking much because it is a responsibility, I believe, of that critic, if you're going to go out of your jurisdiction to talk about, like, you can talk about the food, how it's not there, one thing.
Right.
But there were so many other things to express to the reader. It's like, these are the other things that you should contemplate. Yeah,
that's a really interesting example for a bunch of reasons. I was in LA when LocoL opened, and I sidestepped it for I feel like there are some things that you want to do. And for me, one of the things I really avoid is punching down, right? So the negative review in general is a really interesting thing to talk about. And I'm pretty well known for doing them when I feel like they're necessary, and I can be pretty brutal. But I think that when I do that, it's almost always because I'm like, this is a cynical exercise. This restaurant is a cynical exercise. This is a hotel group that's come in. So for instance, the one that I've done probably, maybe not most recently, but the one that is kind of most known in Australia is this place called Dolly that is in the Meridian on Burke Street in Melbourne. And it's in this building that was like the most beautiful old theater. I went to like the first show without my parents there in the basement. It has all of this, real attachment from people in Melbourne. And a developer came in, and there was kind of like protests, and there was talk of like them going behind, just demolishing it before they even went through the process with the historical folks. They kept the facade, and they put a Meridian in there that is pretty bland. It's like any Meridian anywhere, right? And they put this restaurant in the basement called Dolly, and it's like, I don't think they got some consulting chef to come in and be like, oh, it's Australia. Like, it's a multinational company. They were just like, it's Australia. These people are idiots. They don't know any better. Let's just like put this weird food, and the food is just bizarre, but like, weird, like, but not in a way that makes any sense. I went 6 months later. I didn't write about it. I was like, this is awful, and it's going to close or it's going to progress. One of the two things. They didn't get into our guide. They wrote to us, said, why weren't we in the guide? We sent them some feedback. I went back 6 months later. It was the same thing, but worse, worse service because it hadn't just opened then. At that point, you're like, these people are just trying to pull the wool. They think that we're idiots, and it's expensive, and it's in this building that if you're going to tear down something like that, like put something good in there at least, like make something of it. For LocoL, I actually really wanted to write about what you're talking about, how difficult the proposition was. And I hit a wall because I found out pretty early, kind of through the grapevine, that they weren't really using non-processed foods, that they were using Sysco for most of their stuff. And I wrote to Daniel and said, I want to write about the difficulties that you guys are facing. And I've heard this through the grapevine that this is what's happening. And I just wonder, what's the supply issue? How are you working through it? What can't you get? And I was also in the process of writing a project that I went out to Sysco in Texas, and like I'm obsessed with Sysco. It's such a weird.
For those that don't know, it's a one-stop shop for a lot of restaurateurs.
Yeah, and they will bring you. It's a food distributor, but it has like the supply chains are almost controlled by Sysco, and they're one big competitor. But they will bring you into their place in Texas and teach you how to cook a menu with their stuff. Like there's a teaching whatever. Anyway, getting off the point. But Daniel wrote me back and said, how dare you? How dare you question this? You know? And at that point I dropped it. I was like, this is a really interesting story. I don't know how to go about it because they are trying to do something really difficult. It's not the gotcha that I want. You know what I mean? Like it's not, but at the same time, I felt bad that I felt bad that he felt that way, but I also felt like I wished that there was more of a conversation there. I think the public would be, and I guess I understand there's like this fear that like things will come out and you'll, this was pre-cancellation, but you'll get canceled or whatever. But like, I just feel like it's really difficult to write honestly or to have that like open conversation with restaurateurs. Most of them just don't want to talk about the things that are more ugly, the uglier side of the business.
But I mean, multiple things could be true here.
Yeah, definitely.
When it goes to Sysco. And like on one angle, what if they were getting everything from Sysco? I can assure you that almost every restaurant I can think of in LA gets something from Sysco, right? So if a Sysco truck's outside of there, you know what I mean? Like that's one thing.
Yeah, it's not called LocoL though, and they didn't like promote it it was part of their promotion. It was part of their shtick. Most people aren't saying I'm getting everything locally. And, again, I didn't want to like.
But I never thought of it as that.
Yeah.
I never thought. Did you think LocoL was everything within like 100-mile radius?
I didn't think that was what it meant. I actually had a similar LocoL story with Daniel because I had interviewed him leading up to LocoL opening, and this was like months and months and months before they had locked anything down.
And for the record, we were very close friends with Daniel and Roy.
And so when I say interview, it was probably just a conversation, and he said to me, "It's gonna be amazing. We're gonna do." It's going to be like McDonald's, but good.
Yeah.
Right? And we're going to have they have a $1 cheeseburger. We're going to have a $1 cheeseburger. And when they opened, their cheeseburger wasn't $1. It was $3, $4, $5 or whatever. And I was like, Daniel, what happened to the $1 cheeseburger? And he was like, A, it's really hard. And B, the more I sat and thought about it, is the world better for $1 cheeseburgers or is it worse for $1 cheeseburgers? And like, I imagine that's the conversation you wanted to have with him. Which
Absolutely.
Is like, we set this goal, but like really the priority has to be X, Y, or Z.
Absolutely.
Thing.
And it's impossible. And what they were trying to do is impossible, but it takes somebody trying to get, it's like when you talk about politics and you're like, you're not marrying somebody, you're taking a bus to get closer to where you want to go, like it's a similar, people have to have that visionary thing and try and fail for the next person to say, this is where that fell down and I have an idea to get around that. You know what I mean? Like there's all of these ways that it's really important for people to be ambitious with, and I'm working on a story right now about like, should every restaurant stay open forever? Like, like should we look at things as a failure every time something closes? Or can you say, this was supposed to be a limited run series, this was supposed to be, you think about like the way that British television and American television, like American television, you want to renew it every single year, whereas a lot of the best British shows were like 1 or 2 seasons. Fawlty Towers was, you know.
Listen, there's a reason why Eater still has the closing list, even though it's not called Death Watch, because I know from people in Vox, it's one of the most clicked on things.
Absolutely. And I guess I would like to get to a place where you could have that, but it could feel like a celebration.
Right.
Like, this is what you achieved. Time's up. We're going to do something else, or we're not. Like, you know, but.
Side note, I want to get back to this local thing. I think Alex Pumoulier, who used to work for us, had 30 Acres with Kevin Pumoulier. She wrote an article about closing their restaurant in Eater. You should guys, maybe we'll put a link to that. I think it was like one of the best articles ever written about why you would close, and it's not a failure. That's like, again, one of these things that one day I think the media will have a better understanding of. That clearly you do. Thank you. But going back to LocoL, I think it's, to me, when you have that information from Daniel, like he has that, he can be curt at times. But like that to me is like normal, because like I know where he's at, and
absolutely.
I know, you know what I mean? Like, but I also know like when they were going through that development, and we were there giving them a lot of our very honest feedback on things. Never once did I think that like I was worried about where they are right now, and if they did buy things, whatever. It's like I know where they wanted to go.
Sure.
And I saw the work that they were doing in order to sort of make the cost analysis work. And I was like, there was all of these philosophical questions, so much work.
Yeah.
So that's why I never questioned it. I was like, I know, like, you may need to, like, be able to, like, how should I say? Use it until you don't have to use it anymore.
Sure, 100%.
If that was the case, because I don't even know. It's like, I think that's fine too, but I don't think that's what the article of LocoL was about from Wells.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. And it was a very consumer-facing thing. And there are lots of critics who that's how they really just look at it from a consumer standpoint. And I understand that, you know, it is the majority of their readers, you know, like there are, you know, 30 people who are going to read it, who are involved in the actual business of it. And then there's, you know, 500,000 people or whatever who are going to read it who are not. But again, I do believe that a good review can absolutely do both. And that the reason why sometimes you're writing as much for those 30 people as for the 500,000 people is because the idea is you want things to get better. You want the city to get better, the restaurant to get better, the conversation to get better, all of those things. And so by speaking to the people who are actually the creators, those are the people who are going to make it better. The public isn't going to make it better, you know? So
this is where it's a little complex, right? Because A, what's better?
Yeah.
And B, you know, the other article we talk about with Wells is the Guy Fieri takedown thing, which is like, it's not the 30 and it's not the 500,000. Nobody who's reading that was going to go there.
Right.
Like that. Who's that for?
I mean, that is I almost feel like that was a piece of performance art.
Yeah.
You know, and you know,
Number one most read review by Pete Wells ever.
I think it's probably the number one most read review ever.
Ever.
Yeah. You know, Jay Rayner might be up there with him, but yeah. And
but to me, that is quintessential punching down.
I mean, is it? Guy Fieri's fine.
You think so?
I don't think that's true.
Really?
No. I mean, I don't think anybody that read that in the industry, like, even though it's like, I think everyone felt bad for Guy.
Yeah.
Legitimately. And the other part about that is there is, you know, I say this fully copying to the fact that we are called food snobs 800 times a day.
Right.
You know what I mean? Come on.
By our own audience. But there's an element to that. I was telling Dave, I'll tell a super quick version of the story, but I was took a taxi ride, an Uber ride this past weekend. I was in the car for an hour with this guy. He talked about food the entire time.
Yep.
He was obsessed with food, and Guy Fieri was his guiding light, his guiding star. And, you know, we pulled up to this restaurant. It was not a fancy restaurant. It was just, you know, like a neighborhood Mexican restaurant, but it had twinkle lights outside. And he said to me, "Oh, your burrito's going to have sour cream in it, huh?" He's like, "You're going to the fancy restaurant." And I was like, nobody has ever so succintly just
taken you down. Yeah.
But it's stuck with me. I've already talked to Dave about this ad nauseum, but I was just like, there's a version of and I know you care deeply about where real people eat. You talk about this in the book. I know there's that. And then there's the other version where it's like, I'm pretending to be a person of the people. And I'm going to review this restaurant because I'm, quote unquote, putting myself in the shoes of real Americans.
Yeah, and I have done that. I mean, there's a review of Outback Steakhouse in this book that I wrote when I was in LA that I think is a little, I mean, the reason I did that is because I'm Australian, and I have a chip on my shoulder about, like, you know, the way that Australians are perceived. And Outback is kind of the one of the many kind of, but in food terms, the absolute of that. But I did try to say, you know, what about this food do people like? And I think that is overlooked. It's, you know, there's the kind of like, there's the people who are like, food snobs who like are really into, you know, whatever wine bars or whatever. And then there's the kind of, you know, bros who like to go out and discover stuff and like and you know, fight about it on the internet. When I started, there was very little food journalism about the way that real Americans mostly ate. You know, it was like we talk about Alice Waters and we talk about Julia Child as if these are the people who have created American gastronomy. But the people who created American gastronomy were people who made chain restaurants, basically. You know, that is actually how most people eat. And nobody was talking or thinking about that. And I think it's impossible if you are a professional food person, for professional food writer, to not seem like you're coming from on high and pretending to be that person of the people. But at the same time, you should be looking at that stuff, you know? You should be considering why something like Outback is so popular. And it's really popular because at least you could, when I wrote about it, you could get a pretty big steak for $20 that wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. And also, a Bloomin' Onion is like a masterpiece of you know, everything. It's just, I mean, it is 100% an American invention.
I mean, that is a work of art.
Yes, it is a work of art. And it comes from the like amazing history of like American fair food, basically. It's the apex of like what American fair food can be. So the idea that like I get pissed off when there's this kind of like, you know, when there's a snobbishness about that. And I think that that's gone away a lot. But then it kind of can also devolve into like, you know, I'm done with the hot takes about like, this is why I love a chicken nugget or whatever, you know, like that kind of genre came and went. But I think it was necessary for us as a food writing community to kind of understand why most Americans eat the way they do, what the value of kind of the comfort of sameness is, you know, like the idea that you can walk into a Waffle House anywhere and it will look the same and you're going to get the same thing. And it might not be, you know, well, they're pretty good waffles, but like, you know, but you know what you're going to get. And sometimes.
Do you get waffles at Waffle House? I never get waffles.
I used to call it Hash Brown House.
Yeah. I get a pecan waffle and hash browns.
Wow.
Yeah. And you can get an extra waffle for like 99 cents.
Yeah, I know that, but I never get waffles.
Pecan. The pecan waffle is good. It is good.
Patty melt hash browns.
Yeah. I mean, you can get hash browns and a waffle. You need the sweet and the salty.
I've become a pork chop man.
Oh, shit.
Then they get griddled. It's
Yeah,
beautiful.
I do like that.
Question on this, and I promise you we're going to move forward, get to your book a little bit more. But I think this is all sort of ties to your book in general. And I've always wanted to ask a question, this to a critic. When are you confident to write a review about a restaurant when you know nothing about the cuisine? Because it happens all the fucking time.
Yes, it does. I'm not. Like, honestly, I'm not. And I have various... It was one of the hardest things about coming to LA, honestly, because I had never been to LA before I took the job. And that was a very, very fraught time in my life and my career. I was replacing Jonathan Gold. Ida was trying to out me. Everybody was just like, "You're not Jonathan Gold." And I was like, "Yeah, really? Oh, amazing. Thanks for that insight." But it also was so broad, and there was so much food that I really hadn't had a lot of experience with. And they gave me an assignment for my first assignment was Post and Beam, Govan Armstrong's. And I just was like, you guys are just throwing me under the bus here because I don't even understand the kind of like socioeconomic, racial, like makeup of this city and what this restaurant means
That's
for
so
that.
up.
It was fucked up. It was. They really did kind of throw me under the bus with that one. But I mean, I do so much research. So much of my job is research. And again, I think that that's one of the things people don't understand about like a newspaper paying a professional critic. What they're paying for is to give somebody the time to be like, okay, I really do need to go to like 4 other restaurants. I need to spend a lot of time reading about the history of this food. I need to, I can't fly to Indonesia maybe, but like I do need to like do some comparison to say what the benchmark is. I think that, it becomes really difficult when it's a food that you just don't understand and you haven't. And I honestly would tend to avoid that until I felt more confident about it. It's easy. I get off easy in a city like Melbourne where, 50% of the restaurants I review there are Italian, as you imagine, and the others are wine bars. But, I do seek out the...
But you're different, Besha. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
you are unique and singular in your honesty. I think that I would say almost every other food critic right now writes reviews at times when they literally, and I know this, know nothing about the fucking food at all, or they're dining with the Ringer person, which is like, not Ringer, the podcast network. Ringer is like,
Oh, and I do that. I mean, my sister-in-law, my sister is married to a Filipina, and I take her to all the Filipino restaurants with me because I value her opinion, because she grew up eating this stuff, and not because she's going to give some bar of authenticity, but because she's going to look at it and be like, this is the food of my youth. Like, is this an exciting, does this make me feel excited and like, oh my God, I'm being seen through this food? Or am I like, what are they doing with this?
This is the really hard thing. I think that is, because I get that. Especially walking to a restaurant where I don't know the food, I want some validation that if I find this good, Dave and I have done this. We ate a sandwich up the street that we liked. It's a Mexican pambazo, and then we asked our Mexican friends, like, "Hey, is this okay? Is this good?"
But Javier Cabral,
Yeah.
It's good. It's good. So I understand the impulse. It drives me crazy, and I think it drives Dave crazy too, when it's like you're sort of assimilating that opinion and validation into like what you're writing, where maybe this is too much to ask, like, I don't know, your readership, if you've never had it, you're very well versed in eating. Your readership probably hasn't had it either. And so there's a version of it where, like, do you think food writers are owning, and I mean this in a way of like taking it as a asset, your own sort of ignorance or shortcomings or things you still want to learn about, rather than like, I need to do a bunch of research so that I can present as an authority when I write this.
Right.
review.
I think you need to do a bunch of research, and I think so bringing Rochelle with me to meals is only one little part of it. It's also a bunch of research. It's also talking to the chef about, like, again, what are they trying to do here? And I now know a fair amount about Filipino food. I didn't when I started, when the boom in LA and Melbourne, and that they happen almost simultaneously, of kind of these modern, third culture Filipino restaurants started coming up. It was really important to me to say, and I think American audiences understood this well before Australian audiences did, but like, people with feet in more than one culture are presenting something authentic because it is their authentic experience of life that they have both of these things or more than two things, and that was a kind of almost new idea for Australian audiences who were still very obsessed with authenticity in this way that was pretty lame. And so for something like that, I think that that's where somebody like Rochelle in my life is invaluable, because, there's this restaurant called Sarai in Melbourne that is great. And this guy, do you know the Golden Gay Time? This amazing ice cream that they have in Australia called the Golden Gay Time. They also make really good merch. But he makes a version that's like a Filipino version of like this thing from his childhood, but like he's using Filipino flavors and stuff like that. And for Rochelle, who is American, from the East Bay, like, just feeling seen through, the part of her that's now Australian and the part of her that's childhood and the part of her that's whatever, like, that's important to me, that it speaks to that population in a way that I cannot absolutely, it's not going to bring up all of those childhood. It will for the gay time part, but whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really valuable to me. And quite frankly, most of the time when I take people out to eat with me, I'm like, I don't care what you think. I don't want to hear it. You're going to order what? You're going to listen to me talk it through a bit, maybe. I have a couple of kind of secret weapon people that I bring with me, my husband being one of them, just because he's a professional. So like, if I'm like, why is the chicken like, he's like, well, they cooked it too hard and not in this, you know what I mean? Like that. That's
Has anyone
really
deviated like in Tampopo when you're like, hey, I know what the role is, but I can't. I'm going to order this, and this. And you're like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, no. I'm like, no. Okay, you can pay for yourself then.
I mean, I guess I've also, as I think about it, like I have been brought along as the Asian expert,
totally.
And by people, and I sit there and I think to myself like, I don't know why you think I know what the hell is going on here. Like I grew up in Orange County, California. Like my experience of Chinese food is very broad and much deeper than most people, but it is just what I was fed by my parents specifically, who are idiosyncratic weirdos of their own. So like that's that idea of I need to speak for something that I'm not. It's really hard.
I think that for me, it's more like there will be questions for me that come up while I'm eating that food, and it is very helpful for me to
Before
then
I sound
have
like
somebody,
an idiot saying this is really fishy. Can you explain what this
or
is?
like, what is going on in this? Is this how you're used to it? What's the deviation?
I have so many. We could talk about this for hours because, like, in that moment, I know this because when we got ready for Kawi and before the pandemic ended the world, I thought what Unjo was doing was like so modern, real modern Korean food before the real Korean boom, and people were writing it, and I know that they were coming with Korean people, and I know what those Korean people knew. So they were basing it, I always say, like, food in Australia, Korean food in Australia up until recently was like from the 1970s.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, these people don't know what's happening.
Sure.
They have no idea, zero.
Right.
So the reviews were so limited in what, I was like, I know this.
Yeah.
As modern as you can get without being, like, unrecognizable.
100%. And
so I was so fucking angry.
And there's so many, and I run this website in Australia called A+, that's like it's supposed to be like Lucky Peach meets Nation's Restaurant News, basically, like it's for the industry. It's an industry magazine, but and we wrote a thing about like diaspora cooking and how to and how oftentimes your own aunties are the ones that are that are like, no, you absolutely can't do that. And I've always been interested with Paul, like, could he have done Siobo in New York when he did it in Sydney? It's almost like he had the freedom to experiment and become himself without this Caribbean,
And that's the one time we talked on when you were doing fact checking for the review for Paul, which is honestly one of the best feeling I've ever had from a review.
That's
I
great.
think it was like truly, we've had a lot of great reviews, but that was the best review because I had nothing to do with it, and I was like, holy shit, this is like the perfect review because somebody got it.
Yeah.
I have never asked you this. So going back to the Kawi thing really quick. So Kawi was Unjo's restaurant.
Korean American, very, very not progressive. It just was like someone was saying, "Oh, this is like not kimbap." I was like, it's so modern that Japanese are taking futomaki and getting inspiration from kimbap. You can't tell me it's fucking futomaki. You fucking
I guess what I want to ask is, I guess I want to ask is this then. So obviously what you're saying is the reviewers that came in and brought a Korean person to sort of validate the thing, those Korean opinions were obviously going to say like, well, this is not authentic. Of
course.
So you need to say that in your review.
I don't understand it because why would it be this?
So here's my question for you. Would you?
We got a good review. It just wasn't like,
I know, but would you have
Hunter deserved like a fucking really glowing 3-star review?
But would it have been better then for just a well-informed white person
to just?
Well, this is what I wanted to get to.
Yeah,
this is a long way for me to get to, and hopefully this connects the dots. And Chris, you can help clarify anything that doesn't make any sense, because I'm going to go way off topic again. I think something as an example for Japanese food, because clearly there's sushi restaurants everywhere, sushi counters, but I never quite understood to be able to compare and say unequivocally, like, yeah, this is the best, and this is like
Right.
this. And I know for a fact that none of these critics have gone to any of the top sushi in Japan. Zero.
Yeah.
They like not even a chance of fucking hell they've been there, or if they were there, they got access. Zero.
Yes.
So you cannot speak about what the fuck is happening about sushi if you haven't been to the top 10 to
Right.
15 places. You just can't fucking talk about it.
Yeah.
Unequivocally stop talking about
Yeah.
it. But they do.
Yeah.
And they talk with such authority, like they
I mean,
know.
don't you think that, like, for a place, I mean, I'm not comparing Los Angeles to Tokyo. I'm comparing Los Angeles to what we can get in Los Angeles. I mean, I'm really lucky because I got to do World's Best Restaurants for Food and Wine, and I went to, like, half the countries in the world and ate at both, you know, high and low end places, and that has given me a huge advantage for a lot of this stuff. But I think, you know, if you are the critic in LA or the critic in New York, you shouldn't write in your review, this is as good as anything you'll get in the world or whatever. But if it is the best in New York or one of the best in New York.
4 stars.
Yeah, totally. Well,
It's
again,
basically like this is like
again, for me, 4 stars is you should fly from the other side of the world to eat here. But like, and that's really difficult. But you also don't want cities to become, you know, just homogenized. I don't want Melbourne to only have wine bars and Italian food, you know, like.
But I think what I wanted to get to, what you've been, what you've done, and I'm not trying to blow smoke over your ass, but by being honest about the
Yeah,
situation.
you got to be honest. I think that's
I think
the
by
baseline.
not being honest, and I think this is where food criticism has missed the opportunity, and this is where the social media influencers have really taken all the oxygen from the
Right.
critics, because if I want to know about sushi, even in New York, I'm not looking at any of the major publications.
Right.
I'm not looking at any guide.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there as a reference point. I'm looking at the people that I know
Sure.
have gone, and I see the receipts. Oh, they go to Tokyo 4 times a year.
Yes.
They're going to, you know, Fukuoka, here,
Yeah,
here.
and
And I know that what they think is fucking good now
Is good.
and they are going to
And
recommend this.
You know, good critics have informants. There's a guy in Melbourne who owns a bunch of whiskey bars there, Yao, and he goes to Tokyo multiple times a year, and like, yeah, I follow his lead on what he thinks, you know,
Sure.
is when I want to go. Look, you have informants, or public or private, you know, everybody, you do that, and you form this group of people that you can talk to and call when you want to know if the sandwich is good. You know what I mean? Not even is the sandwich good, but is the sandwich worth pointing out to a broader audience? Like, I liked it. I think it's pretty cool. Like, is this something worth writing about? And you know, you got to. It's another level of research. But I think that you're right. That honesty is really, really important.
Well, I think it's important. It's hard.
It's hard.
Especially the New York Times job is an outlier again, because
Again,
you're
yeah.
speaking to such a gigantic audience, and you do have to represent the avatar that you are, is the all-knowing, all-seeing. Like, I understand all food, and like that's why the expectation is so high. That's why it's so frustrating.
Yes.
For chefs.
That's why they still
But
don't
in
have
terms of-
anybody 10 months later.
In terms of honesty, you know, we were talking about this before you joined us. Honesty about like your own tastes, I think is again to the benefit of you as a writer, is to be like, this is my perspective, my point
Yeah.
of view. I'm not representing
Everybody.
somebody else's or anybody else's.
It's a balancing act. I mean, I certainly get accused of being too self-referential in my reviews.
But so let me ask you this question: What do you not like, food wise?
Oh my God. I don't like bananas.
Great.
I can eat a banana dessert and know whether it's good or not. I don't like them. I don't eat them in my life. You know what I mean?
But that's
I'm
like, just hearing you
Yeah.
articulate that's like one of the most refreshing things
Yeah.
I've ever heard.
I do like lots of things that you hate. I like cottage cheese and pumpkin pie. And I think artichokes are like so fun, the little like teeth thing, like so fun. So, you know, like, I mean, I think I try to find joy in almost any food, even ones that like and I have had to train myself with some things. There are definitely, you know, I'm not a huge sweet tooth. I prefer kind of bitter and salty things to super sweet things. But, you know, I also.
When's the last time you read a review? Because I
Yeah.
was like, hey, and this restaurant is like really known for its cottage cheese pumpkin pie. 2 things I fucking hate the most. So like, honestly, I'm not the right person, but nobody
those are
writes
both,
that.
No, but those are both things that you would eat at home. You know, I mean, I would eat pumpkin pie at a restaurant if they had it, but I think I tweeted like 10 years ago, like cottage cheese is going to be the new burrata. Like, let's bring back cottage cheese. I was kind of joking, but you never know. You never know. I mean,
Chad Robertson, man.
yeah. Well, somebody's going to start making their own. It'll be like,
it'll be listen, Besha, it'll be fine. But you're right. Okay, so cottage cheese, pumpkin, not relevant. But I do think the big things, like I don't like bananas. That could come up. I don't like risotto. When I go to a restaurant, I almost never order a white fish that has been grilled. Like I just don't think it's going to be good unless it's whole.
Yeah.
But these are like a lot of these things would prevent certain readers from identifying with me, because I know this for a fact, because when Dave says on the podcast, I don't like eating artichokes this way, people get fucking pissed.
Yeah, they get so mad.
If I say
it's
something
it's a good way to rile people up.
You fucking weirdo monster.
I mean, I went through a phase where I didn't really like fancy restaurants, which was unfortunate, but I think that like they were really boring at that point in time for the most part, and it really took a couple of experiences for me to be re-engaged with that format, to see people who were being really, really smart about it in a way that, and also, like there has been, there's all of these trends that are annoying to critics that aren't really applicable to regular people. And so you've got to kind of be like, I'm annoyed that everybody is just, you go around the world to these tasting menus and everyone's just trying to be Noma, right? It's just like Noma light everywhere you go. Like I care about that, but like, does the person who lives in that city who's never going to get to go to Noma, do they care? If it's a good, representation
if they don't know the reference, but it's delicious.
Well, maybe they know the reference, but they're just not the type of people who are ever going to get to go there. Like, or it's, a slightly, we have a lot of places in Australia that are kind of doing Noma, but with Australian ingredients. And that's fine, for people who live in Australia who aren't ever going to go to Noma, like, what do they care?
For those that are in the industry, so instead of using cloudberries, they're using finger limes.
Yeah, exactly. So let's sprinkle some pepperberry on this shit.
I mean, the point I empathize with most when it comes to your job is what you said about that LA Weekly job in your first assignment.
Yeah,
just being, I've always ever been in very, very, very privileged, fortunate positions to be like, write whatever the hell you want about whatever you want to write. I waited 12 years of living in San Francisco before I wrote about San Francisco restaurants, and then I just wrote about whatever question I thought was interesting.
Yeah,
getting assigned a thing. Having just moved to a city.
Yeah.
Because listen, I said before when Dave and I were talking, I don't think people should move to a city to take a food critic job, but also you got to fucking pay the bills.
I mean, and that's been my whole life. Like every single job I have had, I've moved to a city to take that job. And Melbourne is slightly different because I grew up there, but also I hadn't eaten widely there since I was a kid, and I have all this nostalgia for the kind of old school Melbourne restaurants, and my readers were just like, what? Like, why are you writing about Jim's Greek Tavern? Like, you know what I mean? And I'm like, because like when I left Australia, I didn't miss the next pepperberry, whatever, like I missed this thing for 20 years. That says something about the city.
So good in Melbourne.
Oh my God, it's so good.
People have no idea. If you haven't left Melbourne and you're in America, you'll be like, yeah, you'd miss it too.
Yeah, I know. And it's funny, people just don't know. Like I had a review come out today. Loon, the bakery in Melbourne that's very famous for its croissants is they have a 3-course lunch you can do where they like try to make croissants into like a full meal, which succeeds and fails in equal measure. It's pretty interesting though. But I was writing about how like I grew up with amazing bakeries. Melbourne has just always had amazing bakeries, and the croissants there were really good when I was a kid. And then I came to the US in 1990, and there was those floppy things that American croissants were like, and I bitched and moaned about it. And people were like, what? Like nobody thinks of Australia as like this place that would have these incredible bakeries. And so they're a little confused, like how is one of the best croissants in the world in Melbourne? But it makes total sense to me. Like that Melbourne is so good at so many things that people just don't really know about.
You talk about being anonymous, and can you reference Craig Claiborne, because I didn't really get into food so much reading his reviews.
Yes.
Maybe the tail end before Ruth took over.
Yeah, that was me too when I first started. But he invented the genre. So he was the food editor at the New York Times from the 60s through, I think, the late 80s. I'm not sure exactly the date. But he invented the modern restaurant review, basically. Before that, reviews, if they appeared, were seen as this kind of like feckless part of the marketing department or the advertising department. It was often pay for play. It was like not, there was no structure around it. And Craig put into place the star rating system that they have today. At least 3 visits, you try to dine anonymously, you always pay your own way. And those are kind of the tenets of restaurant criticism that serious critics tend to still use. The anonymity is going away, and it's going away for all kinds of reasons. But the biggest one being, I think that I started 20 years ago, 2 years after Facebook launched, when it was still, to find hot girls at college campuses. It was not like what it is now. And so I never had my photo online. I just was able to not do that. And now, like, kids have their photo online the day they're born, quite literally. So I had somebody interviewed me a couple days ago and was like, how did you decide to be anonymous? And I was like, mate, 20 years ago, everybody was anonymous. If you weren't famous, you were anonymous. Nobody had their photo in the world. Like, it just wasn't a thing. And then that was also just the standard for critics. Like, that was the thing that critics did.
How important is it to be anonymous?
It's pretty important. Yeah. And I say that as somebody who gave it up literally 1 week ago and have such mixed feelings about having done that.
I've never seen your face before.
No.
For those that don't know, I mean, I get this fucking question all the time. In Bear, is it true that there's pieces of paper on the walls? Like, yeah,
yes, absolutely.
True.
Yeah.
You're an idiot if you don't.
Yeah, totally. And it's your job to know. And I really did manage to not have my photo anywhere on the internet for 20 years. And
there are photos of you, but they weren't you.
No, they weren't. Yes, no, there are photos of me that are Brenda Pollard. And you should Google Brenda Pollard for all kinds of reasons. But it's such a precious asset. It's such a precious asset. And I feel really, really conflicted about giving it up. But
I definitely get judged differently from my perspective, working in a variety of restaurants over the years, when not just my own, when a critic comes in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think about, Jonathan and I were reviewing at the same time in LA, and we had very different experiences of certain restaurants that, I think that I'm smart enough to be able to understand what's happening at tables around me. I also, like, when I was in Atlanta, everyone knew what I looked like by the time I left. That my husband was still working in restaurants there. It's kind of a small community. You get to know people, and so I wasn't as able to be kind of, in the crowd as I could be in LA. And I was still able to get in and out of restaurants where people knew what I looked like without being made. And it wasn't disguises. It was just, the critics who walk in and they're like, here I am, everybody cower, and I think there's a bit of a kind of like, the same thing of why, like, I was able to walk around East Oakland in 1990 when I lived there and not have people really bother me that much. You can be a certain way in the world and like have people not really notice you. And I might be proven wrong, but that's kind of, but I think that the thing, and my excuse is that, my excuse is that I wrote a book and I want to promote the book. But my other excuse is that it's so rare now that it's just not going to be part of the job going forward for anybody. And so was it nice to be like one of the last? Yeah, absolutely. Was it helpful for me? Yes, it was one tool in a box of tools, probably one of the most important tools. And it's going to be really weird and different doing it without it. I think I can. And if I find that I can't, if I find that it's changed so much that it's really not the same, that the job changes in a way that I feel uncomfortable with, I probably will try to find a way out of it.
Do you have prediction on where food criticism is going to go?
Slowly into the grave. I don't like to say that, I'm actually like, I was pretty as much as I'm happy for the people who were recently nominated for James Beard Awards in the criticism category, only one of them is, newspaper critic by profession. They've expanded that category to include kind of cultural writing as well. And I'm like, man, at this point in time, like when there's so few people doing it, but some people doing it very well, I think, is this the moment to kind of expand that category in particular to like let more kind of voices in? Not because I would like to see more voices be critics, but it's so expensive to do. It's very hard to learn how to do well. And there aren't any Alt Weeklies left. So,
I'm going to zag here. I think that we brought up his name quite a bit, and I've had my differences with Jay Rayner over the years, but I think we're all copacetic now. But I think he's created an amazing platform for himself. He's literally like a business himself. And for those that don't know, like Jay Rayner's, in my opinion, sort of like the equivalent of like ESPN Stephen A. Smith, right? Personality, highly opinionated.
He's also just a great writer.
Like, it's not like he doesn't know. It's like he knows his stuff, but he's a business himself, right? And I think because of where everything's are going, I think we're headed towards British food journalism. I think that there's such a place for that, and I really hope that there's a place for stuff that's a little more industry facing, a little more, again, we always get like, why is everything a 2 or 3 star restaurant in Australia? Why is everything get 14 or 15, out of 20? And I'm like, that's because most restaurants are 3-star restaurants, 2 or 3 star restaurants. Like the exceptional restaurants, exceptionally good or bad, are the exception for the most part. That's, there's all this research that says people only go on to Yelp or whatever to write the 5-star review or the 1-star review. Like they don't go and say, yeah, it was all right. Like, and half of the reviews that I write could literally be like, it was good, eat there if you want. Like that's what most restaurants are like. If you're into this type of thing and you're in the neighborhood, absolutely. But I don't know. I'm not sure where it's going. I would like to see it. I would like to see that tradition of Craig Claiborne continue. And I do think that the New York Times has a mandate to be the people to show the way. And I wonder how that's going to play out. Well, man, I mean, we've spoken for like 90 minutes. I feel like we barely covered anything that I want to talk to you about, like why food journalism is so allergic to anything progressive and avant-garde. It's just like all of these things that are crucial to the food industry. And I think in a lot of ways, it's a responsibility that I don't think people understand, both on the journalism end and on the reader end, of like how significant it can be. And, it's just crazy that we're talking to you right now.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It's good. I mean, that's the other nice thing. I get to talk to people now, which I didn't before.
Not hiding anymore. I agree with Dave. There's my mind is spinning.
So many fucking things. I feel bad we didn't talk enough about your book, but I think people should read it because it's not your traditional. It's not your traditional food memoir.
No.
And I've also just heard Besha talk for however long this interview has gone. Like, if you're not interested in the book by now, like, I don't know what else to tell you.
Yeah, I wanted to write something that was like, more, not just my story, like that gave more, like, that gave some history and some culture and some context. And that's what a good review does, hopefully. And that's, I hope, what the book does. I want it to feel like a conversation. So, yeah.
One thing, just maybe to get you in trouble. What city is Melbourne like in America?
Oh, God.
Because I have my take, and it's not. I try not to say.
You do have a whole thing where it's like nothing like in Australia here.
What's that?
Well, when you were writing about your first impressions of LA, you were just like, I just miss Melbourne.
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, it's very walkable, and that's its greatest strength. And it's beautiful, and it's pretty European. I would say it's more like a European city than it is like most American cities. But what do you think?
This is where people,
Portland. I think Portland.
I think Boston.
Oh, God, I hate Boston.
I know, that's why. I don't mean it as an it's got a river. It's away from the coast. It's like 2 hours from the coast. It's like,
food in Melbourne's better than in Boston.
Yeah.
I can't say that. I'm not going.
I haven't. To be fair, I haven't spent any time in Boston in a really long time, so it would be hard for me to say. I grew up partially in Cambridge, and yeah. But
I gotta say, food's great, and Boston's got it. It's got a lot of delicious, but Melbourne has great food.
It has amazing food. It's really. I mean, it does what it does well, which I think is cool. Like LA is so singular in the fact that you can like come here and eat anything, from anywhere, and it's going to be pretty great for the most part. But Melbourne does what Melbourne does really well.
But I feel like people in Melbourne would say that they're like more New York to Sydney's LA/Miami.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, Sydney is sunny and sprawly, and it's a lot prettier than LA, but it's
way prettier than LA.
Yeah, and it's got that kind of like vapid-y kind of thing that I think LA is known for, probably unfairly, because there's the LA that people actually live in, and then there's the LA that LA presents to the world. But there's definitely that New York, LA rivalry, and I also think that it's. People in both cities don't care that, people in Sydney don't care about Melbourne, and people in Melbourne don't care about Sydney.
We know why you left. Do you think you're ever going to come back? I mean, you can learn a lot in the book, and you should read it, but do you think you'll ever...
I mean, never say never. I would come back I would love to have like a bicontinental life, honestly. My kid is grown up now. When I was traveling constantly for work when he was a teenager, that was really hard. But now that that's not the case, I actually love to travel. And so I want to have feet in both places. I think I will probably pay taxes in Australia for the rest of my life. And I'm good with that. It's a really nice place to live. But again, that the world is changing and jobs are changing. And every time I'm here, I'm like, God, I miss, as a muse, there's just nothing like this country, and it changes all the time. And every time I'm in LA or in New York, which are probably the only cities I would want to live in ever again here. Atlanta's great. There's nothing to do there for me. I'm always like, God, I miss being in the middle of culture in that way. I mean, there's a bit of American imperialism in me that I probably will never lose. And it's what Australians struggle with, like the kind of, they feel like they're not paid enough attention to. But I also think Australia is having a bit of a moment right now, and that will continue. And I love being there for that. I was really lucky to be there in LA for that. I feel like I was in LA when LA got recognized as being what it is. And I feel like that's happening in Australia. So that's exciting too. But yeah, I would come back for the right thing or, whatever. I feel like this world's getting smaller and that's getting more possible. The living everywhere,
What do you have to eat before you go back to Australia?
Well, I mean, just 1,700 burritos. Like there's the Mexican food in Australia is real. It's one of the ones that just, you cannot, like, it's just really, yeah.
Well, that's not what some of the chefs that make it think there.
Oh my God. I mean, it's getting
I'm not
there.
going to call them out, but man, you can't talk about that the way you guys do.
Well, I do, and people are really pissed off about it. Yeah, but I mean, it's getting better. It is one of the things that's getting better, but it's still...
You can't just take a 2-week trip to Tulum and all of a sudden...
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. Oh my God. I know it. Yes.
It's my version.
Yes. It's interesting to be in a place that is becoming what it should be. There is an opportunity there that then I don't feel like I have here in terms of writing that is, yay. Today is my pub day and I'm so excited. It's so fun.
Buy it. Check it out. Hunger Like a Thirst. From food stamps to fine dining, a restaurant critic finds her place at the table. Besha Rodell, thank you so much. Where can we find you? Social media?
Instagram. I don't really do much else. I'm on Threads, but I'm a lurker. So Besha Rodell on Instagram.
And people can read your work where?
At theage.com.au currently. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
I mean, we could talk. Maybe we should just do a remote one when you're back in Australia, because I feel like we talk to you all the time.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you, Besha.
Thank you.
I feel like we could have talked to Besha for another 90 minutes at least. I think we could have if we didn't have other things to do. I think we didn't plan it as well as we could have, so apologies. But I think we should probably get Besha back on as a remote Atlas correspondent to some degree. Mm-hmm. But she is very different
Yeah.
than I think a lot of the food voices that are out there. She's honest. She has lived and walked the walk. To sort of finish off what we started in the rambling conversation about what makes a good critic, let's just go over it. What are the attributes again?
Has to give a shit, meaning they have to have a point of view. Has to be able to connect the dots culturally. Should be a good ass writer.
Good ass writer.
Should be honest.
And honest.
Yeah. I think
That's so hard to ask.
I think there's a couple of things that, like, I will revise from what I said earlier based on that conversation. One, listen, I like what she said about like being assigned like an insanely difficult restaurant to have to review, knowing she had no cultural context. I empathize with that. That's a tough beat to have to cover a restaurant in a new city that you have no idea what to talk about. But the other thing, in terms of what makes a good critic moving forward, you said something, and I think we've talked about this. Maybe we haven't.
And for those that know, Post and Beam was Brad Johnson, the owner, Govan Armstrong, both like prominent, great restaurateur / Govan's like a longtime chef in the industry. Used to work for Wolfgang, has had restaurants.
But that's that
places.
That
But it's
restaurant
very significant, culturally significant, and great restaurant.
And to have to review that for your first review, very tough. But you said something, and I think we should get into this in another podcast. But just to sort of wrap it up, I was thinking about what would have made the ultimate fantasy great food critic. Knows everything. Knows all right, this stuff.
Let's put them all together.
But what you said about Jay Rayner is really interesting. Moving forward, what makes it? There's an honesty to Jay Rayner's shit. There's an honesty.
Jay got really mad. I got really mad at Jay one day for something because he did a review, and I was like, it wasn't quite accurate. It didn't dawn on me. I was like, that's a whole nother thing. Accuracy, like that went out the fucking window a long time ago. But Jay does something that people don't really embrace as enough. What Jay Rayner does is he fucking entertains people.
Yeah.
And he keeps them on the edge of their seat of like, I want to know what the hell this guy's going to say about a place. Yeah. And him and A.A. Gill had a long time.
But just owns, like, they are, if there's not an anonymous thread to it. It is just, this is who I am and this is where I'm coming from. And you're going to follow me because I'm entertaining. Like,
much like Serpentor in G.I. Joe, where they took the best of they took the best of all the great military political leaders of our time. Deep cut. Let's cobble together quickly the best attributes of critics. So I'd say one. I'd say the openness of Ruth Reichel. Mm-hmm. She's also just a good fucking writer. Mm-hmm. They're all good writers. We're taking good writing.
That's a given.
No, that's actually not a given.
No. But in this world, to be a good food critic, it is a writing job. At the end of the day, you have to be good at writing.
I think the intrepid spirit of a Jonathan Gold to just fucking go where no one's gone before in terms of food. Like he really is the embodiment of the restaurant next to the restaurant that people are writing about. Mm-hmm. I think that would be great. I do like sort of the humor and the everyday approach. I felt like from a Frank Bruni. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm biased because I got great reviews from him.
It's very helpful.
But a lot of my friends didn't.
Right.
So I know the alternate side of that story. I would also say it's just like the affability of a Sam Sifton. Mm-hmm. Right.
I think the affability, the sort of enthusiasm for dining. I'm going to add this thing. Like we're talking about this Jay Rayner. I think it's just the honesty there is, even if it is stylistically aggressive, the honest owning of your position and who you are, really, and not pretending to be
perfect.
Somebody else.
And that's what Besha has in spades. I actually have a hot take. Pat Nurse knows more about food than Jay Gold does.
Yeah.
You know, Pat's a retired food critic.
Yeah.
I think I've talked to both at length, both wildly impressive. Pat's more of a fucking nerd.
Here's the thing. Pat knows too much about
Too much. I was like, stop.
It's fucking weird.
We love you, Pat, but it was fucking weird. And congrats, he's expecting.
That's right.
His wife is expecting. Partner is expecting. And I'd probably say, the musical knowledge of a Pete Wells. Pete should have been a music critic, not a food critic. I think I would have been way fucking happier.
I think that well, I don't think she's necessarily a critic. I think that there's something about like knowing what the interesting question is that Helen's got at the New Yorker. Knowing,
I feel weird talking about present day.
Okay,
in that regard, our contemporaries to some degree.
Sure,
Helen's awesome. I don't think people understand how.
Then knowing the questions to ask of a young Chris Yang, I would say, is the real attribute I was really trying to get to.
You know, I think also with Tejal wrote like she used to be a cook as well, and I think that was a big thing. It's like, and Bill writes. They're all good, you know. I think that
it's
just like when they're not good, it's more noticeable.
Well, listen, there's a lot of pressure on them as well, but also like it all boils down to honesty, and not just like honesty in the traditional sense. Honesty is an asset, and that's something that you've always talked about. It's like when in doubt, the move is to just be hyper honest about yourself.
And listen, even the people that people claim to be honest sometimes have not been as honest as they wanted. Like, listen, no one's fucking perfect, including the people that have won all kinds of fucking awards, journalist-wise.
Well, that was super interesting to talk to her. I do think we should have her back as a pop-in for all sorts of things, especially Australia.
Buy her book. Besha is one of the good ones and the real ones. Watch us. If you've been listening, you can watch us. Listen and watch on Spotify and YouTube at The Dave Chang Show, our spin-off universe that Chris Yang is now directing.
The RCU.
And give us 5 stars. Thank you to everybody producing this pod. Shout out to everybody. Bye.